the last 3 years since the Rona started. I think it'll be seen as the end of science. It'll be a defining moment in much the same way that the Catholic orthodoxy ended with the Reformation, and then the control of religion over life ended with the Enlightenment. I think we'll now see, well, I think it's already happened, that science ended with the current fiasco and the current circus that we're living in. In recent times, science has almost had that Dylan Thomas thing of like Rage Against the Dying Light, and this is where the likes of Brian Cox and Richard Dawkins and all these Bill Nye and all these I fucking love science types have arrived from. They're desperately trying to defend the dying religion. Now I can hear like all you Poindexters out there going, what the fuck, what the hell dare you call a science religion? Science is based on facts and testing. Well, theoretically, religion is based on the stewardship of the soul. And we all know that religion has failed miserably in this regard. Where science is based upon constant testing, retesting, and evaluation in order to develop ongoing hypotheses that eventually become theories. And we know it has failed miserably. All you have to look at the current association between scientific institutions of learning, development, and the corporate world. Now, these scientists could easily turn around and said, I kind of agree with you, Thomas. Science needs to be taken away from the money men in order for it to become more objective. In fact, you'll meet very few of those. Most of them will just basically attack you and call you a stupid moron, a tinfoil flat earther or something like that. And very few of them will sit down and say, no, yeah, it's unfortunate that corporations play a big role in scientific institutions these days. Very few will say that, but the ones that do say that, they will say, yeah, that's just the way it is, but science is infallible. They still, even when it's blatantly corrupted by corporations in order to get, or globalists, or, the World War IV national governments attacking their own people, they will still side with science every time. So it has become a fate-based thing. Even when it's wrong, it's right. It's a sacred mystery. The Lord moves in mysterious ways. Who are we to question the gods? It's the same mentality. Now, you see the situation today. Let me say, it really began in the 80s, is when it really began. Up until the 70s, the scientific world was in a pre-scientism stage. Now, when things like the Milgram experiment were done, and basically they showed that human beings are so stupid that many of them would kill another human being just because an official-looking person wearing a white coat and holding a clipboard would say so. There was no moral judgment, and once they said the two things they needed, one was the superior man telling them what to do, the expert, and number two was the absolution from any guilt of. So therefore, the guy said, "You won't be held responsible. Just turn up the voltage." We saw that at the Milgram experiment. Now, I love science. Many of the people in the tribe out there, I know you're all fans of science, and the kind of science I grew up with, was the likes of Patrick Moore from The Sky at Night, the astronomer, and even Magnus Pike. Remember him? And there was lots of stuff like that. Carl Sagan. Now, these people didn't have a hatred or a need to attack people who were not fully satisfied with the scientific materialism viewpoint. So if someone said, well, I do feel like I have a soul, they would say, someone like Carl Sagan would say, well, that's probably a good thing, because that's where art and poetry and so much mysticism has led to great discoveries. And they would agree with that. Someone like Arthur C. Clarke would say, oh no, I totally get that. Mysticism is an integral part of the scientific kind of a need to dream out loud. Science can take that one step further and prove or disprove it. But the initial spark is that mystical dream that opens up the thing, the eureka moment that was been held within, that kind of world, intellectual fields, right back to ancient Greece, the eureka moment. And indeed, most of the great discoveries of recent times, when I say of recent times, I mean the last 200 years, have been eureka moments. Someone was riding a bicycle, someone was taking a bath. They were not done in the labs by people testing and retesting. They weren't done that way. And this has led to certain things. Because science has not advanced since the 1960s or 70s, now people say, what about the iPhone and all that? I said, these are existing technologies that have just been refined. Like, take for instance, the electric car. They're starting to show up everywhere now. But electric cars are about 110 years old. They were quite common as delivery vans in the Dublin when I was growing up, delivering laundry and delivering bread and delivering uh, milk. And they were all over the place, these little battery trucks. And, battery cars have been around a long time. The issue, and, there's been battery trains. I mean, the Great Southern Railway in Ireland have held a battery-powered train back in the 1920s. It was a government project to try and electrify the railways whatever way they could. And the drum battery rail cars, which operated on the line south of Dublin, were, good. You can actually find an old newsreel of them being tested. It was a very good idea, and it was done in other countries. Germany had better success with battery-powered trains. There was a rail car that operated in rural Germany. But the same problem existed with batteries was that the weight of them, and you have this conflict, this paradox, this schism between the weight of the batteries and the efficiency of the motors pulling them. Now, motors have been made much more efficient. Motors actually today are remarkably efficient and have incredible torque built into them, especially CAN motors. Couple that with more and more batteries that can hold a bigger charge and a longer charge, you've got improvements in something that has already existed. So you'd say, like, how could you say technology has never not improved? No, battery power has improved. But it's not new. There's nothing new. Batteries have been around since the time of galvanism, which was 200 years ago, and so batteries haven't. Things have been refined, miniaturized, made smaller, more and more efficient, like electric motors, and we now have the first flying airplanes, which are actually very impressive, I have to say. But they're still small, one-man seater planes. But it's a start, right? But it's still not a new technology because it's a battery-powered motor, and it's the same thing as a flying model airplane, just scaled up so a human can fit in it. And again, the ongoing schism, conflict, association between the batteries, the power of batteries, and the efficiency of motors and the weight they can carry. That's always been an issue there with electrical engineers. Now, nothing, you think of like the last great things that have been invented, things like AC current, Nikola Tesla, and things like that. There hasn't been too many of them in the last 50 years. Very little. We still get people into space by putting a bomb under their arse and exploding it. And we still generate electricity pretty much the same way we've always generated. And people say, well, solar has been one thing that's been definitely, the development of the solar electric cell was definitely one of the few things that was a real step in new technology, and it did refine it quite well too. But you still can't get, people still think you can put up solar cells and get like huge amounts of electricity out of the sun. You really can't, and it's getting better, but it's still, the most efficient way of generating electricity is through thermodynamics, boiling water, making steam, hydroelectric, damming a river, and things like that. Nuclear is also part of boiling water as well, but again, nothing new, just refinements. This has led to a situation where these refinements within science are costing more greater amounts of money. Now, this money is not going to come from the public coffers, because in general the public won't fund scientific. They can't. The politicians don't like to fund science, So what it's because it's fallen into the hands of the corporations to do this, and therefore it's the classic thing of he who pays the piper calls the tune, and you have a situation whereby you have the corporations telling the scientists to go back and get the right result this time. So and it's turned out now, like when things like the needlecraft, that the Pfizer research on the needlecraft was woefully filled with incompetence and anomalies, and turning a blind eye. And not only blind studies, I mean turning a literal blind eye to data that doesn't match with what the corporation wants to find in terms of rushing out a product. And this is where science has died. Now, this quite rightly, in the 1970s started to give rise to people, particularly when there was things like major environmental issues like catastrophes, the relationship between science and corporations. 3 Mile Island, for example, and this kind of thing. But there's other smaller things as well, like there was a place up in, when people started to discover that, like, scientists knew that asbestos caused, cancer of the lungs, and they still are smoking. The scientists stand up and say smoking doesn't cause cancer, and this kind of thing, and so many thalidomide and so many things like that. That the public were wary of science and the relationship with corporations. Then to offset that, we were then subjected from the 80s on with these kind of like, yo, science, you can't deny science. Science is always right because science tests and retests and, this kind of thing. And that's led us to the Richard Dawkins thing and the likes of what that creature, Brian Cox, today. And if you want to see a difference between a scientist and a fake, look at the difference between Neil Oliver, archaeologist, and Brian Cox. Now, the thing was, and you want to look at someone who has a soul, look at Neil Oliver. You want to look at someone who has no soul, Brian Cox. And so this whole thing of pushing scientists in our face like they're amazing people, infallible human beings, which is what most I fucking love science people today believe, that no scientist in history has ever done any wrong. That includes Joseph Mengele. He doesn't exist on their minds. Or what was it called? Unit 441, that disgusting Japanese human experimentation lab. And even especially Fauci, some of the stuff that's come out about what he's got up to with dogs and children. It's pure Mengele. But no, science is infallible. It never makes mistakes. This is how they are. This is literally how they are. And that's why when needlecraft came along, they didn't care that it hadn't been properly tested. They stuck their arms up and says, give me science, give me Pfizer, give me AstraZeneca, give me Moderna, and so on. They were willing to be human guinea pigs in trials for something that they didn't even understand, except they're on I fucking love science groups, and science groups going, yeah, science. They don't know anything about science, really. And in fact, I would say that the average person who's on I fucking love science and goes, we got really smart today, trying to like copying articles from like, Futurism or the New Scientist, trying to make out they're really clever when it's just a copy and paste job. I would say many of them are as dumb and stupid as the flat earthers. Like they like the flat earthers, like the same kind of dumb, uneducated stupidity that leads people to believe the earth is flat, or the mud flood happened and the actual neoclassical buildings are actually classical buildings they dug up, and this kind of thing. That these, and mountains are big trees and stuff like that. These folks, the folks in I fucking love science, are as dumb as those flat earth morons, or the star forts. Like they're fascinated by star forts, and you go, well, what do you mean? I don't know. There's something about them. And the reason why they're fascinated by star forts is because of the name. They think it's something to do with Star Wars or spaceships. And they think there's some kind of like spaceship or something. And that's what they won't tell you that, but that's what they think. That's how dumb they are. But the I fucking love science types, yo, go science. They're just as stupid as the flat earthers, and just as uneducated and moronic and easily led. And the flat earthers, their creed is Christianity, the Bible. The I fucking love science types be Brian Cox and Bill Nye. Now, the madness of science is undeniable in recent decades, and this was also because people, anyone, even if you had no great scientific background, you have this gut feeling that something wasn't right here, that these fuckers were full of shit. And so, a part of that good feeling comes from a kind of a belief in the daemon, in the soul, in the interior man, in this kind of thing. And so, this became an imperative thing to deny the soul, that there's no part of you that is, that this part, your subconscious is still part of your cognition. There's no external version of you impacting upon you in terms of being your daemon or your whatever, your higher self. And so therefore, you have like, Brian Cox saying recently there's no such thing as a soul. Well, of course not, to him there isn't, because it's obvious that he doesn't have one. But he has to also understand that his version of reality is not the same as mine. My experience of life is very, very different. And that's why he doesn't have that feeling. But the madness has developed into a situation where you have scientists saying, science proves there's no such thing as a soul. And now science proves that gender is a spectrum. So the whole thing of the X and Y chromosome is now being thrown out by all scientists in order to fulfill a political mandate, and yet they still tell us about the infallibility of the scientific process. I mean, this is how bad it is. So it's like you have like situations where so many of them are making money from the whole climate change scam that even when there's an earthquake or an asteroid, they say climate change caused it, and you're supposed to believe them. Now we have this situation where the sea levels are rising. I have seen no proof that the sea levels are rising to any dramatic degree, and I've looked into it. Just like I was, yes, that man has an impact upon the planet, but it's nothing compared to a volcano. One volcano can produce more in a week, can produce more emissions than the whole world has since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, nearly 200 years ago, and they never factor these things in. And of course the climate changes, and they say things like, you don't believe in climate. Well, I do believe in climate change. I don't believe that we're making it happen the way to the degree you are. And this kind of thing. And they lie, because all money, so much money involved in that. They made a gravy train for themselves that governments will fund it. Now, with the Rona and the needlecraft thing, you had like the Prime Minister of Ireland, Micheál Martin, saying last week that the success of the vaccination programme in Ireland proves the triumph of science. Well, no, the vaccination, the needlecraft has been a complete and total catastrophe. You were told initially by these scientists like Dr. Luke Kelly here in Ireland and your own boffin in your own country that the first needlecraft had a 90% efficacy rate. If it was that 90% immunity was guaranteed. Well, it turned out it didn't work at all. And instead of people saying, oh, it didn't work at all, here's the second one. And the second one came in, the rates of infection went through the roof. And the obvious answer to that was, well, the second injection caused the increase in infection. And then you had politicians and journalists who don't know anything about science saying it was the unaffected it was the unvaccinated who were spreading the Rona. And you had scientists come forward and say that's impossible. Now, you see, the thing is, like, they'll say, well, trust science, but this was only the science that the scientists who worked for Pfizer and the rest were the only ones that you were supposed to trust. So, for instance, when there's many top leading scientists said, well, the golden rule is you never vaccinate in the middle of a pandemic. You wait for the pandemic to end, and then after natural herd immunity has kicked in, then you develop a vaccine to inoculate the population for future mutations of the same thing. And but they went because politicians wanted to be seen as saviors of their people. So those types, that they rushed forward this half-assed inoculation needlecraft that failed miserably. So the second one it wouldn't be needed if the first one had a 90% effectiveness rate. It doesn't work. Now, after the second one, people started to die and drop dead and develop serious illness. And then they said, as well as the actual infection rates off the scale. And you were not allowed to even suggest for a moment that either the people dying from reactions or the increasing infection rates was a product of the actual needlecraft itself. You were not allowed to say that. How dare you? This you know nothing. I mean, I have like civil servants on Irish message boards going, you obviously don't know how vaccines work. Yeah, I do. You take them, you're immune to the thing, and that's how they work. This one isn't working. Well, you don't know what you're talking about. You know, this kind of thing. So, where's your degree? Were you a virologist? No, I'm not a fucking idiot. That's a difference. Are you a scientist? Nope, but I'm not a fucking idiot. And so on. And only gaslighting could keep the thing going. Only gaslighting could maintain this farce. And so now we have the booster thing, and they're dropping dead, and the infection rate is higher than if they had their worst projections that had it been put out there through just using herd immunity alone. So they've actually, through the booster, they've actually have more deaths and more people in hospital and ICU than they had made predictions of when they just said that what would we just let herd immunity happen. Now you have two situations here. One, science and politicians have been caught out as liars, and they can't ever allow you to find that out. Especially scientists, they will kill you. A scientist will kill before anyone questions their data, and this is why there's so many murders among academia and stuff like that, and there's lots of jealousy and pettiness and things like that. Now, so we have a situation now where the human race is basically being exterminated by a philosophy surrounding the immaculate inoculation. And the high priests of this are the scientists, well, the ones who, the state-approved ones, which is most of them, and the politicians and the bureaucrats. Meanwhile, any scientist or doctor who speaks up is struck off the list, is called a moron, and don't get the grants. And you'll say, I want experts to agree. And you say, well, here's an expert. This person has worked in virology for 15 years and has actually 25 years and has actually helped develop vaccines at Pfizer. Oh, not that one. I mean a real one, like Bill Nye. You know, this is what you're up against, you know. The guy who said that gender is a spectrum, my sex junk. And they've gone completely and further into madness. So they're killing people at an enormous rate. So that's the end of science, okay? It's over. Now, what do we replace it with? Well, obviously, we still have to develop, new technologies and so on going forward. I think maybe return back to something like natural philosophy, which existed before the scientific revolution of the late 1700s, early 1800s, a sort of a pre-Darwinist version of science. Now, I'm not saying Darwin has wrong, I'm just saying because that was a lot to do with the fact that, that was the beginning of the killing of the spirit. You don't need God if you have genetic evolution. Well, of course, you can have both. Both are completely compatible. One is the trigger, one is the outcome, and mutations will happen naturally as well. But just like the coronavirus is mutating and killing all the people who took the needlecraft, and so it probably return to something like that. We don't have polymaths in the scientific field anymore. We have people who specialise in one thing, and then they spend the rest of their lives in a lab somewhere, injecting shampoo into a bunny rabbit's eyes or something horrific like that. And nothing new has been invented. Nothing. Even many of the theories surrounding things like quantum theorem have been out of pre-existing things that have been around for 100 years. It really is quite remarkable. Science, the only thing that science has developed in the last 50 years is a more comfortable relationship with corporations and governments, and that's all there is. That's really what they've developed. But they've developed their relationships with governments and politicians and corporations is the main development that they've done in the last 50 years. So that's it. Science is over. So when someone says to you, of course there's good scientists out there, but they don't have any. They're destroyed, attacked by mainstream academia. But of course, when people say to you, "Oh, you must trust," basically, let's put it that when someone says to you, "Trust the science," they're saying the exact same thing as "Trust the will of God." That's what they're saying. And then you turn around and say that they say, "Oh, well, the scientific method is about testing and retesting." No, it's not. Well, in theory, it is. Just like in theory, religion is about the salvation and stewardship of the soul. Well, it's nothing of the sort. Well, the same thing as science. Basically, anyone who says, trust the science, they're not like a scientifically motivated person or anything. They're an IFLS type. You're dealing with an idiot who's just dumb and stupid as a flat earther. So stay awake and stay clear and stay, cogent to this. Like, let's take a scientific fact, right? There's no such thing as a scientific fact because everything is constantly changing and developing and be retesting, and there's a natural flux to things. Something like Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance does a much better job of this than scientific materialism. And so, a scientific thing would be, here's an example of me using science, right? Here's what scientists should have done. Tell you what, I don't have any degree in science, okay, and I dropped out after 1.5 years studying electronic engineering because I didn't like the college environment. But but even though I did finish my first year studies with distinctions in both laboratory work and theory, so I was well on my way to being a beginner scientist. Academically, I was doing well, even though I did not enjoy the actual Marxist nature of college life, which is very, at the time I was going, was run basically by communists among the student unions, and I didn't like many of the students either anyway, and I liked the professors were actually better people. But anyway, so here's me talking science, right? I'm my unscientific brain that Brian Cox considers me a retard because I believe I also have a soul and I believe in reincarnation and that I believe there are spiritual forces and dynamics to the universe, right? That this brain that would be considered like backward today. I hear about a virus that is coming out of China that is a very severe viral infection. I see videos of people on the streets in Wuhan, and I think to myself, oh Jesus, there probably is a probability that we're dealing with a bad virus here because we've had them in the past, and the overprescription of things like antibiotics and the general poor health of the world population. It's, this is something maybe we should be worried about. Data starts coming in, my unscientific brain goes, according to this, you've got a 99% chance of surviving if you do nothing. Okay, so I'm not that worried about it anymore. Okay, so then we have all the restrictions, the lockdowns kicking in. I'm thinking to myself, well, why is this happening? When you have a 99% chance of surviving, and then I start thinking to myself, well, maybe I'm not getting the full data. So my unscientific brain goes, oh wait, hold on a second. It's people over the age of 88 who are mostly dying of it, and anyone under the age of 60 dying of this coronavirus is almost nothing. Okay, it's nothing to worry about. It's just like any seasonal flu. Okay, so therefore I'm attacked for being unscientific. Next thing, in the middle of the height of the outbreak, we're not wearing masks, we're not social distancing, and they're saying you can only spend certain times in pubs and this kind of thing. And I'm saying, well, yeah, it makes sense if there's a potential pandemic to wash our hands and to maintain social distancing. And if you have like you're prone to respiratory things, or things like diabetes or HIV, I have cancer, stay indoors or reduce contact and this thing passes. But then that's my unscientific brain saying this, and I'd be called a moron and a retard for proposing this. Next thing is they say we have an inoculation, a needle graft, a vaccine to actually help people, and I'm like saying, well, why you don't need it if you have a 98%, 99% chance of survival, and as more data and facts came in, it actually increased closer to 100% survival. And at the same time, they were locking elderly people inside the old people's homes and retirement communities, and these folks were dying at a catastrophic rate. So this was artificial, and I was saying, well, there's the reason why you think so many people are dying is because they're artificially boosting up the numbers because they're locking all the elderly people in a building, my unscientific in buildings and my unscientific, and they also die of things like neglect and sadness, and their bodies shut down. They lose the will to live. That's what my unscientific brain thinks, and the average I fucking love science goes, you're a fucking retard. Trust the science. So the next thing that happens is they have this inoculation, and I find out that the tests have not been fully done on it. It hasn't gone through the 7 or 10 years of full testing, and the initial results weren't even going to be ready till 2023. So I am not putting, through common sense, an untested substance in my body. I was called an unscientific moron. They lined up, they got it. The thing has now shown to be a catastrophic failure. It doesn't work. Along with the second and the booster, now the evidence is flying in, quite substantial evidence, that this needlecraft is fucking deadly. Is fucking deadly. And you're still told you're an unscientific moron if you just even notice that there's abnormally high rates of dangerous reactions and bad reactions and death towards it. You're told to ignore it. It means it's working. Yeah, I know that some vaccines you don't feel too good for a few days afterwards. No, death is a different thing than not feeling good. So we have now a situation where large numbers of sports people are dropping dead. The World Economic Forum tells unscientific morons like me it's just because they're not at peak fitness at the moment, and that's why they're dropping dead of heart attacks and blood clots. You unscientific moron, and you're supposed to believe it. And it goes on and on. And meanwhile, the scientists who have anything neutral to even say about it are ignored or they're attacked. While the mainstream liars who tell you to wear a mask, like the mask is an interesting one. The mask does not spread or stop any virus. It is purely a symbol of compliance. It won't stop anything. The spread of the virus, if you have a weakened immune system, it doesn't matter if you're wrapped up in a mask and a visor, it will get you. It will get you. If you're healthy, like most people are in terms of fighting this virus, you have nothing to worry about. But they have to maintain the process of terror. Now, being a scientifically minded person, I like to think so. Just gave an example of why. I also like to see myself as something of a polymath. So I'm aware of things like the Milgram experiment, Edward Bernays, MK Ultra, and all these other conspiracy theories that were scientific projects in order to destroy humans' ability to think for themselves and to question authority. And I bring that into the equation, and that's part of my polymathic scientific view. And that's what has me in the situation where I'm sitting here now for 2 years telling you, your human rights are being violated based on the most fraudulent science in the history of the world. And that's saying something, considering we've prior to that, well, not that long of the climate change thing, which is the second most biggest fraudulent science thing in the history of the world. Both things have been embraced by leftists, because leftists and social justice warriors don't have souls. All you have to do is look at a profile pic. You know, rainbow flag here, skinny jeans down there, and remember the big frame glasses. Very important to these types. Anti-fascist. And Brian Cox. And when Brian Cox, that's why I said, like, I'm not wishing this on Brian Cox, but if Brian Cox ever gets, I don't know if he's married or not, but if he has a child and so that child dies, and he's trying to look for sympathy on television, people should remind him that he only considers his own child a storage of DNA, like all atheists. Do you want to bring these I fucking love scientist types to their test their fate? Literally, say to them, why should I care about you losing a child, your child dying, when you only believe your own child and your own wife are just bags of DNA that can be easily be replaced, and there's no spiritual or soulful, and the emotional connections that you have with them is a trick of body chemicals. So why should I feel sorry for you? Oh, they will go bonkers. Oh, they will actually, you will see their inner Mengele come out. You'll see the real intolerance that holds their little smelly little worldview together. So I think I've just given a good example of why science is dead. It's gone. And it's, your average scientist is no more trustworthy than a priest or a monk during the Middle Ages. And that's it. It's over. Science is dead. It was killed by science and the I fucking love science brigade and the interference and funding by politicians. It's over. Now, it can't be. This will be the end of it. We're now facing a Holocaust. Science is currently unleashing the greatest Holocaust possibly in the history of the human race, by having us preparing for a global warming planet when there are good indications we're actually going to a colder planet, and also to have us prepared, have us ready for these inoculations that will just kill and destroy people's lives. As someone who had, just think of it, those of you who are watching this right now with the Kaposi sarcoma now appearing on your face because you've had your booster jab and you're now having the first stages of what we used to be called AIDS, but an immune suppressed condition, and you're sitting there going, I'm dying, or you're shaking, and the shakes, and then you got twisting, and you're not recovering, and you've lost someone. That if you had been a scientific minded person, like this moron here and most of the tribe, you would have said at the very beginning, hold on a second, there's a 98 to 99% chance of survival. I'm not taking that. What's the point? There's barely 2% chance of dying. And that's science. Sanguine gnosis.